Hi there, my name's Gemma. I'm from Wibu Studios and I'm going to show you how to create Tony Romance using a piece of concept art from start to finish. So I start off with primitives, and this is to keep everything simple. You know, you basically just want to flesh out everything first before going into all the fine details. It's the same with drawing and sculpting and pretty much anything if you want to craft something. So I mean, I stick to things like cubes, cylinders, spheres. You'll probably see here that I use the cube quite a lot. So once you've placed your basic shapes, that's when I start adding things like edge loops, and then I slowly shape it into into something that looks more like a boot, I suppose. I'm careful to not add too many as I go, and whenever I do things like this, I always take away some edge loops that I know I don't need. So you kind of do a bit of both, trying to keep it a certain level of simple. Don't worry too much about the topology at this stage, because you can fix it later. At the same time, try not to forget if you leave any n-gons. N-gons being polygons that have more than 4 sides. Be careful with those. So here I'm slicing and creating the edge of the coat. I'm just like slicing through the polygons carelessly. You can see I sort of fix the n-gons almost instantly. I sort of forget if I don't do that. At this point I actually got a little bit confused about how to build Tony Romance's trousers and the overlaying of the coat. So you might be wondering why I've created it this way. I realized halfway there was actually a better way of doing it, but oh well, we all make mistakes. So I just go ahead and fix it. As Tony is an animated character, I make sure to add enough edge loops around the pelvis area. This is so that he can lift his legs, dance, do whatever without it deforming strangely. At the moment he's got childbearing hips, but I assure you I do fix that eventually. So when it comes to limbs, like arms, tentacles, legs, anything like cylindrical, I try to determine the amount of sides there are vertically at the very beginning. It's because it's quite difficult to add more edge loops later on and space them out correctly. So yeah, I try to avoid messing around with the vertical edge loops after this point. You'll notice me adjust vertices one by one, flicking back and forth. And this is because before I add any more detail, I want the existing vertices to be shaped correctly. It seems tedious, but this is actually well worth it at this stage, because later on when you subdivide and add more edge loops, it becomes more and more difficult to adjust the basic shape. Keeping in mind this is a mobile games character, if this was on PC, I'd probably religiously make sure I went through that step first before adding more geometry. Once again, I use a cube. And a few people might be wondering why I didn't just use a sphere, but I prefer the topology of the cube over the sphere. It's laid out a bit nicer and more neatly, so I can control it better. And in the end, I subdivided it and smoothed it. I'm collapsing some edge loops around the head, mainly the sides, because I know that I won't really need that amount of geometry to indicate the shape of the head. It's really important that you look at the silhouette of the character to determine this. So here I create eyes by extruding a single vertice that sort of automatically creates a ring around that vertice, so you have somewhere to start off with. I use the curve tool to extrude tubular shapes, things like tentacles and vines, strands of hair, and in this case a mustache. It's pretty useful because with this method you can adjust the thickness of the tube. You can also adjust things like the amount of edge loops there are going around. And as you can see here, you can even adjust one end to be thinner than the other end. And here you can see me adding, manually adding more edge loops and adjusting the shape a bit more. At some point, I scrap that one and I create another because I decide that there's actually too many edges going around the cylinder. That's better. 4 sides. Here I'm using the lattice tool to just shapen up the mustache a bit. I could have shaped one and just mirrored it, but I decided I'd like a less symmetrical look. The bevel tool is quite useful not for just smoothing out edges, but for also helping you to create ridges and embossments in your models. In this case, it helped me create the little bumps that you see in the spine. It's a simplified version, of course, but the bevel tool is hands down probably one of my most used tools besides the lattice and extrude, of course. I'm creating a rib the same way here as I did with the mustache, using the curved line tool and a circle, and extruding it down. It's quite handy. So now that I've fleshed out the coat, I'm adding edge loops and more geometry and smoothing out any hard edges I see. You can see me fiddling around with the edge flow here. Sometimes it takes me a while to work out the best way to place the loops. So sometimes I'll add an edge loop and a few seconds later I will take it away. It becomes sort of like this dance of adding and deleting these edge loops until I find it looks the way I want it to. So you'll probably see a lot of this. Whilst I'm making the hat, I'd like to point out that the concept I'm using isn't facing straight on forward or to the side. It's not perfectly orthographic, so oftentimes you'll see me rotating the item. In this case, I'm rotating the hat 3/4 to the right, just so I can see what the shape's like if it faces that direction, the same as the hat in the concept. Here's a prime example of how you can benefit from the lattice tool. So instead of like readjusting all the points of the hat, you've only got 8 points. So the rest of the video is probably more or less the same. It's me rehashing the techniques I've mentioned so far. It's important to just keep tweaking until the very end. Tweaking and adding more polygons, making sure the character itself looks good from all angles. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to stay quiet now until the UVing process. Now that the character is more or less finished, it's time to UV unwrap it. For those of you who don't know what a UV map is, it is a projection map for your texture. And the texture is what colours the model. I only ever use the planar projection tool, as I find the other ones are a little bit tedious and kind of pointless, especially when you can make an incision and then unfold it later on. So here on the head, for example, I've made a cut at the back, so when it unfolds it's a lot like a Halloween mask. The aim is to get the least amount of seams visible to the player's eye. If there's any issues with texturing, at least it would hide it. Oh, so you'd hope. In this case, for the ribs, there's nothing to worry about. Most of the seams will be invisible because the coat is covering it. I straighten out the edges of tubular things like cylinders, or in this case it's a ribbon that wraps around the hat, because it's very efficient with space, and as pixels are square, no matter how low res the texture, if it's a solid color, nothing should bleed. So once the pieces have been unwrapped, I select the whole character and I use the layout tool. This, as you can see, lays out all the pieces to the correct scale ratio, but it doesn't do the best job with filling in gaps. So even after that, I have to readjust the positioning of all the UV islands. And this is the model done. Well, it's not done yet. In the next video I'll cover how I texture the character, and I'll show you the feedback process in Wibu Studios. Thanks for watching. To be continued.